Many people ask us how to improve their IELTS speaking score. And by far the best tip that we have for you is to listen to native speakers and to try and emulate them. So today, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to be answering some questions from a mock IELTS speaking test and giving my answers as a native. So let's jump into it. Well, to be upfront with you, I'm not actually a student right now, but when I was, I actually did a history degree and I found it very interesting. It's a passion of mine and that's what I chose to study. Well, if we're talking about university, I actually went to a university in a town called Canterbury, and which is about 2 hours away from where I live. And it was just a really nice place to go. It was a very historic town, a great atmosphere, and the university itself, I think, was a fairly good place to study. Well, I suppose looking back, there were several things that I enjoyed about going to that particular university. The facilities were quite good. We had an excellent library. There were several different places where you could socialise, the student union, for example. But concerning the actual curriculum, I was able to pick many different subjects and I wasn't sort of told exactly what had to do, but I could choose what I wanted to do. So that was a bit different from the experience I had in secondary school. Well, yes, I do use it every day. It's mainly for washing my hands. I wouldn't say I use it for the rest of my body, as I have fairly sensitive skin. So I tend to use a product that's a little bit better for that. It doesn't give me a rash or anything like that. Well, I'm not going to lie, I don't have a particular brand. I wouldn't say I'm a person that has brand loyalty to a particular soap manufacturer. I tend for soap, for washing your hands, just to go for a generic brand. I couldn't really tell you the type of soap that I use. Yes, I do. I share soap with my wife, and if there's any guests that happen to use that particular bathroom, I suppose we also share the soap. Um, it's not something that I've really thought about before, and now that I am thinking about it, it's a little bit unpleasant. Now that I'm thinking about it, I do kind of have a preference to pay cash rather than using plastic because I feel that if you're using cash, then you know exactly how much you're spending. There's more of a perhaps an emotional connection to the purchase. Whereas if I'm using a credit card, it's quite easy to overspend and not to keep up with your budget. So that's probably why I tend to opt for cash. Well, being from the UK, leaving tips is not really in our culture. It does happen certainly, but it's not as in some other countries such as the United States. It's not kind of mandatory. It's not expected. So we would leave a tip if we've had particularly good service, but it wouldn't be a daily occurrence. Certainly not on my part. Now, thinking back, I don't think I did. I didn't have a weekly allowance. I certainly had to do certain chores around the house. And I think the system that we had growing up was if I swept the floor, for example, my mum would give me a certain amount of money. So it was almost like a paid job, but it wasn't sort of a regular fixed amount each month. Um, but if I needed to buy something or I wanted a toy or something, then probably if I had been good, my mother would just buy it for me. Not that I was a spoilt child, but within reason, she would buy it for me. So you've asked me to talk about a school project that I was proud of, and I'm going to tell you about a t-shirt design that I made. So this was back when I was in secondary school. I can't remember exactly how old I was, but I think it would have been maybe in year 8 or year 9. So I would have been maybe 12, 13, this sort of age. And this was in art and design class. And what we had to do was to come up with our own unique t-shirt design. And then we were going to use a printing technique, and it uses ink, but to be honest with you, I can't remember exactly what the term is for the printing technique. But you would have to transfer the image onto a t-shirt, and so there was a special way to do that. And it was quite exciting because we were making our own clothing and we were given the opportunity to put our own stamp onto this t-shirt, quite literally. And so what I did was I got a little bit geeky and I decided to do a design based on a very famous picture. And it's in the pop art, yeah, the pop art movement by an artist called Roy Lichtenstein, something like that. And it shows an image of, it's like a comic, kind of looks a bit like a comic strip. And it shows a very famous aircraft from the World War II. And because I'm fascinated with this era, so I simply love aviation from the Second World War. Um, so I made this picture and put it onto the t-shirt. And the reason I'm proud of it is it's kind of an interesting skill. It might even be a skill that I'm going to use again in the future. Well, to be quite honest with you, I'm not sure where I fall on this argument because although I do think that everyone should have access to education, I do also feel like some institutions need to have a certain amount of investment in order to give better education. Um, the reason for that is if you don't have good enough salaries to attract teachers, you won't get the right sort of candidate to go to those institutions. So I'm not sure if we should have free education. So I do feel in some circumstances that these private schools, they're valid, and I think that trend's going to continue. The only reason that I can think of is possibly because they don't want students to forget all of the things that they've learned during the term time. So I remember growing up, we used to have fairly long summer holidays. I think the longest one we had was 8 or 9 weeks. And for the average student, between the last term of year and the start of a new school year, you're going to lose a lot of the things that you've been taught, you're going to lose that knowledge, and also you're just not really in the mood after so long at home and in the holiday mood to go back to school and to start learning again. It must be tough. So yeah, I'd imagine shorter holidays kind of overcome that obstacle. Well, that's quite a tricky question to answer. I would say from just my own experience, I did find my exams quite challenging, the A levels and the GCSEs. But is that a reflection on the difficulty of the exam, or is it a reflection on me and my generation? I do know that from news and newspapers and things that I've read, that they say that the exams in the past were, the standards were just higher perhaps, and also the way that people were taught and the amount of information they had to hold in their mind um, was, a lot different to the way that we're taught nowadays. So I suppose for that you could argue that the exams are less demanding, perhaps. Whether or not that makes it easier, I don't know, but certainly I don't think I could pass an exam from 50 or 60 years ago. without doubt, there's a lot of changes in the education field. Even in my own lifetime, education's really changed, particularly in the way that it's delivered in the classroom. But overall, I think if we get rid of teachers, like trained teachers, it's going to be a negative thing because although there's a lot of ways that you can do self-study, through books, video, and other platforms. I personally think that having a tutor, someone that you could ask when you're having difficulties with a particular issue, or perhaps there's a point within the lesson that you don't understand, having that tutor there is much, much better than just having like a robot, perhaps someone you can't interact with, or following a video course. Um, so to my mind, it's going to be a negative thing. It could be argued that batteries in any form have revolutionized the way that we live our lives. If we take an example, the car. So cars have batteries, and without vehicles like those, we would be limited in where we could go, where we could work, all those sort of things. And so yeah, I think that batteries really, they're the reason that we live our lives in the way that we do and have the level of comfort that we do. Well, I would say that it's going to be incredibly difficult to wean ourselves off of batteries and things like that. Um, whether or not they are as harmful to the environment as burning fossil fuels or things like that, I couldn't really comment. But I think that to try and stop using batteries, just to go cold turkey, would be incredibly difficult. Instead, probably we would have to have a transition over to another power source. Um, but yeah, I don't think we're going to get society as a whole to suddenly stop using batteries because they're omnipresent. They're everywhere really. So that would be incredibly tough, despite the harmful effects they have on the environment. For the most part, probably having a dead battery is not the end of the world, but there are certainly some circumstances where not being able to contact someone by your phone is going to be really dangerous. Um, I suppose one of the worst case scenarios would be if you were in some sort of accident. I know of stories where there have been plane crashes and things, and there are survivors, right? But they don't have reception, or they don't have any power in their phones, so they weren't able to contact anyone. And in the end, when they were discovered, days or weeks later, they'd actually died, whereas they could have been rescued if they had batteries in their phones. So that would be an extreme example, but certainly a danger.